Hello. We're live. Okay, so I'm going to quickly introduce myself, and then everyone's going to introduce themselves. And we're going to kind of give a little, where are we from, what are we up to, and one thing that we want to see on the curriculum for the Great Imagining, as a little jump starter. So I'm Frankie, and I'm going to be moderating this session. I am part of a youth-led collective called Repeat, along with Jamie and Poppy, who are also here. Yeah, we want to kind of change the perception of peatlands everywhere. Peatlands have got a bad rep at the moment. And one thing I would like to see on the Great Imagining curriculum would be a session or a part of the curriculum on the intersection between peatlands and time, looking at the history of peatlands, the peatlands right now, and the future, and the way that relates to peatlands. So Poppy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm Poppy. I go by she, her. I'm also part of Repeat. I'm currently back at home from Amsterdam, so I'm living near the Peak District in the northwest of England. And I would like to see more tactile learning and children getting involved with peatlands in person, and also just touching the soil a bit more, I think. Yeah. Jamie?
Hiya, my name's Jamie, I go by he, him, and I'm also a member of Repeat, currently my second year studying biology at Oxford. And I think something that I'd love to see in the Great Imagining is a course of lessons completely focusing on the links between things and the intersections between things, and that is the focus of the lessons, and especially how environmental issues are completely tied up historically and philosophically with social justice issues as well. So that's the sort of thing I'd love a lesson on that. Wish I had one. And then I'll pass that on to Samuel.
Well, I'm sort of in a way new to this game, and I'm a sort of hopefully new evangelical person in sort of understanding what you said, like how everything is linked. And I thought I had one responsibility, because I'm a restaurateur in London, a restaurant called Morrow. And I sort of thought I had a sort of understanding of, you know, a quality of what I was producing. And I thought I had a responsibility of just giving delicious food to people. And it's like 1,000 people a week. It's not nothing. That was pre-corona. But and so I was sort of offering a service and sort of educating people about, you know, natural food and the deliciousness. And then recently I've just understood that actually that's not enough. And I sort of seem to be a little bit, with food you can be an influencer, you know, and so I want to just raise the bar morally, intellectually, environmentally, whatever way you want to say it. And I'm just, so in the lockdown, I had suddenly had all this time on my hands. So from being on the coalface, cooking, chopping onions, and doing stuff, suddenly had this time. And so I was able to read and learn, and so I just, you know, read a few influential books of things I was interested in, and it made me think I have to, you know, there's a different way of going forward, you know, and I can, you know, influence people and make them think about the soil. And also I started with compost. So I instead, you know, so I just sort of had time to do the compost, and it was like, wow, these things are alive, and then, where did that come from? I just put some vegetables there and suddenly they're alive. And that sort of really excited me. And I thought, oh God, it's just a middle-aged thing. You get excited by compost, you know, what a dull man you've become. But, and then I started, we used to give the compost at the restaurant to the, sorry, I'm babbling on. We used to give the compost to the restaurant, to the council, and they would create, you know, supposedly, you know, deal with it And then I thought, that's a waste. I'm selfish. I want to keep all the restaurant compost myself. And so then I started taking it all home, and then suddenly I got these mountains of compost. And it's fantastic, and I feel empowered. I feel empowered. I've got these mountains of living stuff, and it's fantastic. So anyway, so that and then I basically, yeah. Anyway, I got babbling on, but
what would one thing you would like to see in the Great Imagining curriculum?
Well, the futility of eating meat, really, and dairy. So that's a big change from someone who's been churning out lots of protein. I want to just, educate people to the futility of eating meat and protein, and so that's a big thing. I mean, that in itself is a big thing, and I think it's so that as a chef, I think I can influence people. So basically, all I can do simply is write about it and make plant-based food so delicious that people don't even think about eating, protein. So that's sort of my challenge, is just so they're not even aware. It's just a transition which happens, and they're not even aware. They're just healthier and better, So that's sort of all I can do on a small. I mean, it's a small thing, but it's a big thing. If you can have 1,000 people eat in your restaurant a week, and then they leave and they're actually not aware that they haven't eaten any protein, that's great. And I do it with magic, and smoke and screens. They're not even aware. I'm not going to make a big thing of it. That's the idea.
Who are you going to pass it on to?
Well, apart from the 1,000 people a week.
Oh, I mean, like on the Zoom.
Sorry.
Maybe Severin, you want to go next? Sorry, it's good if we just all give it to the next person. Then it makes it. But Severin, you want to go next?
Yeah, there's only one person left.
Is it me? It's me. I'm in Washington State. That's why it's dark outside, because I'm preparing breakfast at a plant out. We're having a group work in agroforestry, land restoration, but we're doing it socially distant. So we're eating outside, but we have to have a lot of hot soup. So I've been in the kitchen for 3 days cooking. So my name is Severin, and I'm an organizer in the agrarian world, and I have been for 15 years. I run a small organic farm. We make organic blueberry jam, strawberry jam. We collect seaweed from the ocean. We make oysters. We do as much as we can in the wild, but we are farmers. And I'm thrilled by this Great Imagining. I think it's really important, having this summer absorbed a lot of kids who were out of school onto the farm and saw how starved they were for the curriculum of life. I can imagine that there's a lot of parents newly awake and available to put on a different opportunity for their kids than Netflix. Although there is some good stuff on Netflix. So what I'm particularly interested in is giving the opportunity for the young ones to tune into life systems, to tune into, earth life, and to think of themselves in their body on the landscape, and be able to visualize the river that they're a part of, the ocean that it flows to, the uplands that define the unit of life and landscape that is their home, and start from that position and start enlarging their kind of own body and their literacy of how the body of the earth is working. And it's just called natural history. It's not like rocket science, and it's something that's incredibly affirming, additive. There's always room for sharing. There's always room for another observation. So I feel like the basic practices that have been the study of so many of our great natural philosophers, natural historians, explorers. This is just the practice of natural history. That's what I hope will be a part of the curriculum.
Nice. Aoife, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hello, I'm Aoife. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm 16. And I've been involved with very youth-based type activism, and obviously with a really large focus on the climate and different aspects of how it intersects with different crises as well. In terms of what I would add to the curriculum, I think, well, one of the campaigns I'm part of is Teach the Future. So on that aspect, we do a lot of more, we do a lot of like lobbying. We very much push for the systemic level change needed in education, to sort of include the climate crisis, but also not just in order to prepare students, but also on the basis of teachers needing to have qualifications, of them being able to actually understand it to teach. And it covers a very sort of wide range and aspect of things with regards to education and the climate. And then, of course, I'm with the Mock Cup team. So we've been more, well, rather than having a sort of national base, we're looking out to, on an international platform, present to world leaders that actually, this is what the COP can look like. So the coalition of the parties, this is what it can look like, this is what it can be. We can be both ambitious but realistic, and with the support of different academic partners and the whole sort of foundation and basis that we're running on right now, we'll be able to lead up to that event happening in November. And yeah, the whole point is to essentially imitate the COP, but again, as I said, it's about proving that, we the youth have such an important element, especially when it comes to these decisions that are being made, especially given that we cannot necessarily be directly involved with what ends up happening, and the influence that youth often have is really limited. And so throughout my entire climate activist journey, there's been such a huge push for youth empowerment and the uplifting of voices, particularly those that are often neglected and ignored, again, especially in the global south, in areas and countries where there isn't that much media attention. But all in all, if with the Great Imagining, I think a really large aspect, of course, the climate crisis, but more in depth with that, I would say, the acknowledging of how, historically speaking, I think Jamie Walker, you touched up on this a bit, and that really did connect with me, especially because it is such a huge element, the colonial history that the Western world has, and the impact that it's had on so many other countries and nations, and how it continues to have an impact, and how there's so many roots to it that we really need to unfold and actually not just acknowledge, but have a much wider and better understanding of, because there is that learning capacity that we have, but we just don't include that in our schooling and our education. And I feel it is such an important element that would be wonderful to have, and that as a kid or as someone in perhaps higher education, I'd really want to focus down and have a much wider grasp on it as well. So yeah, that's me. And yeah.
Nice, thank you, Aoife. Josiah, I think and Stephen, so Josiah, want to go next?
Yeah, hello, I'm Josiah Meldrum, and I'm the co-founder of a business called Hodmedod, which grew out of a community project in Norwich, which is a sort of regional city in Norfolk in East Anglia in the UK. And we asked the question whether Norwich could feed itself, and how it would need to change diets, and how agriculture would need to change around the edge of the city, and how we could create a more resilient food system for the city, which kind of acknowledged all of the crises that we know that we face. And Hodmedod emerged out of that really to support one particular element, which is what are broadly called combinable crops that are harvested at scale: beans, peas, grains and seeds, which are largely anonymous on our plates, and they are globally traded commodities, And it's incredibly difficult for farmers to break out of that commodity trap. So Hodmedod exists in order to create new routes to market and new ways of creatively thinking about how land might be managed and how we can get more diversity onto our plates and onto farms, not just in terms of crop species, but in terms of the people that are involved as well. And I think if there's one thing that I would like to see on the curriculum through the Great Imagination, it's kind of explicit reference to agroecology, that connectedness between us as humans with the natural environment and our relationship with each other and with the systems that we rely on, and how primary production happens and how it fits into that and how those relationships kind of interact. It's really critical. And I think certainly in the UK, we're taught about food in a very reductive way. It's all about technology rather than about natural systems. And we need to get back to natural systems to understand that that's where our food comes from.
Nice. Stephen, you want to go last? Oh, sorry, Lenny.
Yeah, hi. My name's Stephen Whitehead, he, him. I'm the director of Countershade CIC, which is an environmental arts organisation that basically goes into schools and cultural settings to teach people about sustainability and to try and increase people's empathy with nature. So really, you end up teaching yourself, because I think the real motivation for people comes from it being about them. You know, you see everything through your own eyes. So until you have empathy with nature, why on earth would you deal with this other issue? But when you have empathy with nature, it's part of you, and you're just looking after yourself. It's just yourself is not just this individual anymore. So I would really like to see work in education where things are more project-based and more creative, so that you are rooted in the here and now, so that you learn what you learn through doing things and through living them. And most specifically, I think if we accept that climate crisis is not just a phrase, that it is a genuine crisis, then it should be a huge part of the curriculum that people understand their place in that crisis. So I would make it mandatory for people to be educated about their carbon footprint, how to calculate it and how to change it. And that would need to be done through workshopping and through practical projects experience, so people can actually live it rather than just learning a bunch of facts and figures.
Nice. I'm already seeing lots of synergies between all of our desires for the great imagining. So
there used to be a button, I think it's changed because of this, where you could just sort of thumbs up and you could see an agreement. And I was visualizing those thumbs up when everyone spoke, because I just thought we're all going, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. What he said, what she said, basically.
Nice. Lenny, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Lenny, or Len, going by he, him. I quite like this idea of not talking so much about what we do, but where we live, because I think this says much more about who I am. Like, I'm based in Friesland in the northern part of Germany, and I moved back here after 4 years of being in Berlin and Amsterdam. I grew up here. And with Corona, with the crisis, we moved together here in a little, well, quite nice big house, because in the countryside you can afford it, and moved together with 3 activists. And we started a lot of projects here, and I'm still involved in a lot of projects. But this living together really, first, it's an alternative way of living. Like, before I was in the city, I was studying, and I was honestly not really happy with this. And now I spend half of the day working on a farm, just doing manual work, a lot of weeding, mostly weeding actually. And the second half with activism and learning. So we started a reading group, we started a project called Climate Action Buddies. We did a lot of activism, a lot of gluing ourselves to some buildings and this kind of stuff. But really this thing of connecting this with half a day manual work on the farm, and a lot of things that you mentioned, connecting to the soil, a lot of practical things, but a lot of also maybe spiritual things that you experienced during that time. And the other half really doing activism. That was just perfect for me. What else? Yeah, right, with the curriculum, I think manual work. That's something like I read in a lot of books, but now I also experienced this. And again, for me, this thing about weeding, just doing this for 6 hours straight, and then the next day again, and then a week later, everything is already grown back. And dealing with that and getting the patience and not being distracted all the time, you get so many good ideas. And I would really encourage students to maybe just do this for 2 weeks, something in that direction.
Nice. Amory, you've just joined us. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit what you've been up to, where you are, and one thing you would like to see on the curriculum of the Great Imagining. Oh, sorry, you need to unmute yourself. Could somebody unmute Amory? Yeah. Can anyone hear? No, we can't hear you, unfortunately. Is the audio connected? Still can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Maybe try to reconnect.
Yeah, maybe go offline and come back on again. See whether that works. Okay. Well, I guess Amory's going to come back to us in a bit. And maybe the next round we can go in the same order. Oh, is he back? Hello? Oh, gone again. And talk a little bit about some of the issues that are happening in, or some of the kind of, like challenges that we face in each of our areas. And then the second part of the session will be about like the solutions and the kind of the actions and visions and things that are happening that are kind of problem solving with these issues and challenges. So maybe Poppy, you want to start? And
I guess with peatlands, one of the main things that is apparent is basically that no one really understands what gems they are, really. And
maybe you could also give a little Peat 101 for those who don't know what peatlands are.
Okay, so peatlands are bogs, wetlands, and the moors, and they're found in like almost all the countries all over the world, and they're made up of sphagnum mosses and plants that like build up over time. And because the water table is so high, when the plants die, they don't actually break down, which causes it to be acidic and waterlogged, basically. So it builds up and builds up and builds up, and over thousands of years, it becomes this like really dark matter that actually is like a pickled plant matter, is one of the phrases that I really like. You know, it doesn't break anything down. It kind of keeps things alive in there, which is why, as Frankie mentioned, it's great with time, because you can literally dig down 10,000 years and find what's happening or who was living or animals that were there. And also they store like so much carbon, because all of this plant matter that's died doesn't break down. And they store so much carbon, but what we're finding is that they're being drained for agriculture and other things, and all this carbon is being released into the atmosphere, and it's vast, actually. And can't think of a quote come to mind, isn't there? But there's so much carbon being released, and all of this.
6% of global emissions are CO2 emissions come from drained peatlands. So that's like equivalent of roughly 3 times the aviation industry. So it's like mega, and big. No one really knows about it.
Yeah, big. So that's the main issue I think I found, is that these are not only beautiful biodiverse areas of land, they're just underappreciated. So I think that's the main thing I would say and no one knows about them or thinks about them or walks over them and thinks, oh God, it's a bit soggy here or something, you know, they don't actually realize how amazing they are. Jamie?
Yeah, I think that I'll just say a couple of like kind of more kind of specific kind of I think that's like really like the general kind of like challenge that at Repeat at least we're trying to kind of like sort of influence and kind of change in people's heads. So and I completely agree with everything Poppy said. And so I'll just add like a couple of like recent sort of challenges that have been difficult in that kind of area. And so we've been sort of quite angry at the Common Agricultural Policy decision yesterday, where the EU Parliament voted for a position for that reform, which was nowhere near as ambitious as was hoped, and kind of keeps the issue of where the subsidy payments go to much rather than to small landowners to wealthy and really like the highest landowners, and also still pay subsidies to farm on drained peatlands, and doesn't provide any subsidies or incentives to farm on wet peatlands, which is and we've still got hope with the negotiating and the and the process over the next couple of years that this won't be the final kind of say, but that's one of the challenges. And I think and in the UK, in England, there's a peat strategy being drafted at the moment, which will come out at the end of the year. And so a big challenge with that is the issue in England we have of burning upland moors for grouse shooting, and that's something that is also another quite specific issue that we're trying to think about, and how much of these moors are on peat soil, and that releases 260,000 tons of CO2 every year, and for a relatively small group of individuals, and the benefits, the costs don't really kind of add up really. So that's another kind of, those are two sort of big challenges, I think, and just the sort of idea generally of how I think the sense of frustration, I think when, you know, when we're sort of, we've been kind of pushing for this and believe in something like that, and the people who have the power actually to shape like this future, you know, they have the power to actually kind of make these decisions in such a way that we believe can have such a positive impact, and they just don't. So I think that's definitely just a general challenge, I think, of being in this sort of field, and I'm sure it won't be the last time that sort of frustration will be, but like kind of just have to keep on hoping and fighting, I guess. But yeah.
I realize that this is now going to be like getting out all of the baggage, and then we're going to really like reimagine everything. So I think like we keep started and like, what are the issues, you know? Sam, would you like to say in your area what some of the like the main challenges that you think? You're on mute, just so you know.
Well, I mean, obviously I'm to do with food, and I mean, you know, it's disgusting. I mean, in one way, restaurants are quite efficient ways of feeding people, just the economy of scale. But in some ways, it still, you know, fills me with disgust. Just how, you know, just it's still very wasteful. I mean, I just you know, it's just, I see stuff. It's just wasteful. It's horrible. So I'm aware of it now. You know, so I you know, we changed our menu to be less wasteful and to be more plant-based, and it's sort of it has made a huge difference. You know, big difference proportionally in the company. So I mean, it's, with quite small changes, it's great. You know, it's we can make a difference, but it's still not enough. It's still, you know, I still feel a bit sick how we haven't, you know, got the control.
Well, I think this whole conversation is how not to feel sick and how to feel inspired and how to take action. So hopefully by the end you can feel an inspiration.
We are taking action all the time, and I think I just got to be more proactive as an educator and an influencer, and I'm feeling inspired. I've used this time to get inspiration from reading and educating myself. So you know, that's why I say I'm feeling a bit evangelical at the moment, and I'm armed with more information, and this is all part of it, and that's great. So just connecting with everybody here is an inspiration in itself, and you know, so you know, I'm going to interact with the whole new generation of people, of young and everyone who works with me, and I'm going to go out there and spread the word, and it's just a different mindset, and that's what it's education basically. I mean, in the future I sort of see myself as an educationist, and so that's sort of my role. And I'm, you know, as I say, I'm doing courses on, you know, on soil regeneration, and so I might, you know, in the future I hope to reinvent myself as use my same senses of smell and taste to be able to smell anyone's soil and be able to say, this is what you need, that's what you need. So nice. I'm trying to keep in touch with my senses, but use it for the land.
Cool. I was just going to check, Amory, is your sound working now? You're still on mute, but maybe if you...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I really apologize. We've had some major problems here with the net and then getting this thing to work, and I am a utter Luddite when it comes to this technology. I'm Emery Blow. I'm very briefly, I'm Emery Blow. I'm involved in the management of various triple SIs, which is sites of special scientific interest. In particular, the preservation of unimproved limestone grasslands, of which we have approximately 4% of what we had in 1914. These lands have disappeared as a result of modern farming practice, application of nitrates, introduction of foreign grass seeds, and as a result, we have lost much of the flora. You can imagine those, imagine those 1920s sort of images of a field full of flowers and butterflies and all that sort of thing. That's all sort of gone. And so we look after these lands. I like to think of them as living arcs, where we preserve certain species and the community that live about them, in the hope that as agricultural practice changes, these seeds will then spread into the broader landscape and restore basically something of what we've lost. I also very passionate about growing herbs. So I really love the last speaker about the smelling and feeling the soil and such. Very wonderful herbs. I mean, herbs are large. I mean, many of them are sort of very close to, are either their wild ancestors or close to their wild ancestors, and are perfect for attracting sort of insects and sort of, and they in turn various basic invertebrates, amphibians, reptiles and such, birds and all that sort of thing. We use them in cooking. I'm from a farming background. Note, of course, the amount of farm produce that's rejected at the farm gate, the amount of produce that is rejected in the kitchen, how little use we make of what we bring into the kitchen. Food, I'm a great believer that one meal comes to define the next one. What you have left over, you use, and you process what you were left over into something new. I hope all that makes sense.
No.
I'm slightly... Yep.
You might have missed the initial question, but you haven't missed it. But if you were to put one thing into the Great Imagining curriculum, what would it be? That was the initial point.
I would like to basically what I'd like to do is to encourage people to engage with the broader nature, the broader environment, in basically whatever level they can, be it in their garden, or if they have land on their land, if it be in their garden, if they have a windowsill with windowsill pots, basically, or simply pots. To actually, what I'd like to see is people move back to growing wildflowers, wild plants, herbs, and the such. Get away from the sort of developed plants that insects don't love so much. Create little oases about the place, basically, which will feed our insects, create insects corridors, and that sort of thing. Does that pass?
Yeah, that definitely passes. I'm just looking at the time, and I know that we started on with the challenges, but I think maybe as we move on, maybe we could do integrating challenges with solutions, just on in the interest of time. Maybe Severin, you want to start off with how's your work kind of dealing with the challenges that you have and kind of posing solutions to that?
You starting with me?
Severin?
Severin, okay.
You're muted.
Hi, the challenges for helping young people get into agriculture. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, and integrating the challenges with some of the solutions that and some of the kind of, the ways that you're dealing with these challenges and maybe overcoming them as we look forward.
Okay, so the question is, how do we help young people get into agriculture if they so choose? Not to force them necessarily, although maybe we need to make a more forceful argument for why it is a wonderful way to go. And that argument hasn't really been made often to the young people in a moment when they could make that choice. Many young people in England are already organized in the Land Workers Alliance, and there's incredible curriculum already provided through online learning platforms such as the Oxford Real Food Conference. There's a really wonderful online curriculum that could be bundled from all over the world through the Via Campesina network and agroecology networks, agroecology schools that have been started in Latin America, provide an example of a socially integrated curricular approach. But really, the thing that's great about farming is you can go and work on a farm and be an apprentice to a working operation. And because in the US, at least, if you're farming, it's essential work. So you're exempt from lockdown, which is nice. Mm-hmm. And as an essential worker, you can and in a rural setting, you can be socially distantly active, which is, how we're doing our tree planting parties here. It does feel like people being together on the land together is a really under-recognized prerequisite social condition for a set of insights that we as a society need to have. Let me say that differently backwards. Cultures around the world who maintain a natural resource commons as an underlying part of their sustaining on the land, from Andean cultures up in the high mountains to the Balinese rice gardens, to the pastoralists of Switzerland, commons-based land management that doesn't happen inside of a private property framework requires group work on the land, often in a ritual and spiritually meaningful way. Group work, in England they have May Day, that's a little bit of a group work in fertility rites. So just to give you an English example, but the ritual in New Mexico on the irrigation ditches is called limpia, and it's in the spring. Everyone gets out to clean the irrigation ditch. And dig out the muck so that the river can flow into the ditch and go on to each of the different farms. Now, it's not just about the cleaning of the ditch, it's also about like assessing the ground truth, reacting to an ecosystem in flux, reconnecting directly with the ecosystem that we are dependent on. And I think one of the major ways that we can help orient young people to be successful and survive is to help them gain the skills to directly observe the destiny of their home landscape and how they could and might intervene in that destiny for diversity, resilience, density of life and enterprise, da 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 da. Step one, have the eyes to see. I think I talked too long, so I better shush.
No, you didn't at all. That was great. And I love the idea of just getting people onto the land together. I mean, Corona aside, yeah, that's what we need, I think. Aoife, would you like to go next?
Sure. With regards to challenges and solutions, I take it. Well, I mean, personally, I guess from my experience in, youth climate activism, I think in terms of what adults can do, it's, they can provide support, but I feel like, especially when we have carved out specific spaces, that in itself is an issue. It's as if, like, as much as empowering as it can be for us to be taking the lead in some aspects of climate activism, it is quite unfortunate that we almost have to do that, because they're clearly, it's clearly us trying to create a bubble ourselves, because it is often inaccessible in a wider space. However, I've had experiences where things have been really positive in the way that I've been able to collaborate with people that are 2 or 3 times my age, and it's about being able to provide that kind of really positive support while maintaining that outlook on not being necessarily tokenistic in the way that they're approaching youth climate activism, but more so in a way that it again is amplifying what is existing and what we are capable of doing and saying. And aside from that, you often find it's the same voices being featured in certain media outlets and different parts of our of us within the media, within sort of the public space. And so a really large part of that is preventing the same voices being heard that often they really just quieten out and just push to the side those that really do need to be heard, those that really are facing those frontline situations. And so I think there's a really big role there as well for what many people that are already perhaps in these jobs or are looking into what is it that we do are able to take forward. And of course, then there's a systemic level of change, which I think as much as we may be pushing for it, it does kind of have to come from those decision makers themselves. And it has to be that inner decision that they make. And there is obviously the limit to what we can do, to what we can say. But having said that, you do see these little steps, because there are those certain individuals that are in positions of power, or not necessarily like, super large positions, but they're just one of these elements that are able to create a push, to create a change, and that itself is quite hopeful. And I'm really glad in that sense. But I'm afraid I will have to leave you all. It was so wonderful to meet you guys, and I'm really glad to have been invited as well. But yeah, thank you so much.
And let's connect more about the mock.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Sounds fantastic. I'm really glad, guys. Bye.
Bye. Nice. Josiah, I think you were next, maybe talking on some of the issues in food sovereignty, kind of agroecology in the UK. And the solutions that come. Yeah.
I mean, challenges are manifold and obvious, everything from access to land through to lack of political will, through to, a crisis that has been, that we've been well aware of, both as a community of people, but as a government. People have known about this for 40 years. It's nothing new. It's not like some massive revelation that we're at this point now. So yeah, those are big challenges, obviously, but I feel incredibly positive about a lot of the things that are happening at the moment, particularly from the farming community. So there's a whole next generation of farmers. These aren't new entrants to agriculture, but they're a next generation of farmers who are taking over from parents or family members, and are bringing a whole new lot of vigor and ideas around regenerative agriculture, a realization that they're not going to be, they've got to do this. They've just got to get on and do this. And increasingly they're looking at how they can make their land, the land that they own, and there's lots of questions about why they own it and how they've come to own it in the first place, but making that available to other people who are also able to then engage with kind of primary production and things. So yeah, so the challenges are kind of, frankly, they're utterly disempowering. And so it's often best just to get on with doing what you can actually do day to day. And for us, that's just engaging people with where their food has come from, introducing them to new crops that they may not have thought about eating or thought about growing, getting them really excited about those crops. Because do you know what? It's amazing how few people have actually seen the things that they eat growing, or have driven past fields every day on their way to work and not had a clue about what's going on in that field, what the crop is, what the process of producing that food is. And so being able to do a bit more of that is a great way of starting people to think about, the soil, what the soil can do, and how we can nurture the soil in order to begin to address some of the problems that we face. And it doesn't hold all the answers, and it's often presented as holding all the answers, and it absolutely isn't that. But it is something that we can begin to address. And thinking about diets and about where their food has come from. If that anonymous commodity on your plate, for example, rice, where has it come from? Who grew it? What was the environmental impact of that? And beginning to get people to ask those questions. And that's kind of what we do through our enterprise. Prior to that, we'd spent 15 years, the three of us, working for an NGO since the late 90s, looking at advocacy work, engaging with government. And frankly, we felt we'd kind of hit not even a glass ceiling, a pretty solid concrete ceiling above which we just couldn't push any further. And we were asking farmers to make changes without there being any route to market or any opportunity for them to sell the new crops. They knew that they needed to change, but it was very, very difficult for them to see a way in order to make that happen. So that's largely what we do. And I think it is positive, and it does make us feel kind of empowered. And I hope it makes the people that are eating the pulses and grains and seeds feel slightly empowered. I think there's this neoliberal Washington consensus idea that we can buy our way out of trouble through consumption. Of course, that's absolute rubbish, but we can make positive choices about how we spend the money when we need to buy things to eat, and that is a very positive choice.
Nice, thank you. I just realized, in the interest of time, maybe we will go on to questions. Is that all right with Lenny and Amory, I think, and Stephen?
I would really like to respond to what Severine said, because just very quickly, because what you said with connecting to the land, I don't know who's in the audience, but just from the experience from coming from Amsterdam as a student, and when we talk about education, we think about a lot of how we can provide education, but I think it's a lot about how can we educate ourselves, like all of us want to educate. So I just want to mention briefly, like one more time, I can really encourage, if there are any students here and Corona might be still going on for 2 years or a year, or I don't know, to just replicate this experiment that we have done, like just go to the countryside, grab 2-3 other students, and maybe you come from an activist background, and repeat this living experience. You can go to the countryside, you will have much more space. You can make these experiences that Severine talked about, and at the same time still have enough time to teach yourself what you need, connect internationally, basically have a lot of things that you have in the city, but in the countryside, possibly even where you're from. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that as also way of having a solution that you can really do next spring when there's again work on the fields. Nice, thank you, Lenny. I'm just going to look into some of the questions. There's one from Ollie that's just a question for everyone. I'm not sure. He writes, are any panelists familiar with developmental systems approach? It comes from child development psychology and is applied in many fields, especially in studies of ecosystems. If so, could it be applied to this discussion as an aid to understanding how complex systems relate to each other? If not, can it be added to the curriculum so that we can educate citizens as to the complexities of systems and how important it is to learn before we act? Does anyone have
knowledge about developmental systems approach in the panel? No? Well, I guess that's just a note for the Great Imagining team. And this is a question for Poppy and Jamie. How is it that garden centres can still sell peat-based compost? Who extracts it, and how can extraction still be legal? And I think we have some information on that.
Poppy, do you want to, should I start and then you can add anything I've missed off? Is that all right? So I've been looking at this just a little bit for the for the upcoming like England strategy and stuff, and it is pretty crazy. It's my understanding of it is that the government went for like this kind of voluntary sort of approach, like I think starting back about 2011, say kind of, oh, you know, guys, phase out your use of peat-free of peat in compost, and then groups I think often looked at the kind of consumer end of it, and saying like, you know, people, you know, you like stop buying peat compost and shift the demand and things, and but actually, and that's done something, but there's clearly it's done as much as it can, but more needs to be done, and actually, so most of the peat in compost that you'll be buying in the UK isn't taken from peatlands in the UK. It's taken from peatlands elsewhere, primarily from, my understanding of it is it's primarily from Ireland, but also from Europe as well, from the Netherlands, from Germany, Estonia, and Belgium, and so we import this peat, and so really what a big hope is that in the upcoming strategy that there'll be laws to ban importing of this peat from elsewhere, and that'll hopefully drive companies to embrace alternatives, and it is mainly used peat compost in kind of industrial sort of horticulture and things, rather than by individuals. And as I said, like that was the voluntary kind of thing, and people are quite aware of it on the consumer end when you go to the garden centre to buy things, but it's kind of now focusing on horticulture and agricultural companies. So Poppy, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, coming from like a horticultural point of view, loads of gardeners that I've spoken to, and you know, like mushroom farmers, you know, like button mushrooms, a lot of people don't know, but they actually use a layer of peat on the top of their huge grows of mushrooms. And trying to do loads of research myself into finding mushrooms that are grown without peat is proving quite impossible, and they're saying that there is no alternative. And I know that a lot of horticulturists that I've spoken to, they say that they're, at the moment in time, we don't have an alternative that people are willing to try, or for like mushroom farmers especially. I mean, these grows are massive. I mean, think about how many mushrooms are in your supermarket. And they're just saying there isn't an alternative, and all the alternatives that we do have are so much more expensive. So I think that's why there's like not this big push from horticulturists to go peat free, is because they seem to think that there is no alternative, which is a shame. But yeah, it's a big shame. So there you go.
I agree, and I'm sure there are alternatives. It's more just what you said about the price being too expensive, you know. There's one more question from Ollie Stedman. Are any panelists impressed by a particular rewilding project? There are many across the world, whose manifesto and general approach they can recommend as the best one to support. Forced to choose between rewilding an area in general, flora, fauna, insect life, versus rewilding a single species, e.g. the recent successful introduction of transcontinental North American wolf population. Which would you support? Would anyone like to make a comment on rewilding?
Well, I mean, that was one of the books I read during lockdown, which sort of enriched me. Yeah, was
Oh, I think there's a phone ringing. Oh yeah.
I mean, it was very inspirational for me, the Rewilding book by Isabella Tree, and it did seem like an incredible way of being able to reinvigorate and an area, and they seem to think that it had financial benefits, and so they have been going around the country saying, not only can you reinvigorate all these dying species from newts to eagles, but you can also make money from it. And so they're going around the world saying, you can do this and you can make more money than conventional farming. So I think that's, all of these things, if people can be persuaded and farmers can be persuaded that there is an alternative to conventional farming, then obviously it is really inspirational. So basically the question was just one species, but I mean, I think it's a no-brainer that if you can successfully rewild, then you get from the whole scope of animals and ecology, they all can bounce back, and
the whole biodiversity benefits. Yeah. Does anyone else want to say something on the topic of rewilding? I think specifically it was like, do you know any good examples of rewilding projects?
I have one that's quite local to me. Like 20 minutes from my house, they've just introduced beavers to this area of land, which is on a peatland, because what they've done small projects, and this is like another one in my area, and it seems to be working really well, because what the beavers do is they make dams, and when they make dams, it keeps the water table up, which means that the peatlands aren't draining as fast, and it's like a natural way for them to bring, like, they haven't been there for 400 years and they're like now bringing it into this area, and it's going really well, and the biodiversity from keeping this peatland wetted by the beavers doing all the work is quite amazing. That was part of the Wildlife Trust project. That's all I know really about that, but it's going really well, and it's kind of cool that we can get an animal to do the hard work and get all the benefits as well. So like this big system, and everyone's happy really.
Just use the animals, they'll fix it. Well, we're animals too, to be honest. Let's be honest with ourselves. I think that's all the questions I have on the note. Unless, I have another one. Where is the beaver reintroduction site? Sounds really interesting.
I will post a link for the website for that.
Nice.
Can I go back to the peat issue?
Yes.
I think I've just participated now in the National Organic Standards Board process, which is evaluating inputs for organic production, because I've been campaigning to slow the removal of native biomass in the form of algae from the coastline where I live, where it's being mined to use as fertilizer. And what I recognized from this process is that so many of these minings that are going on, well, I just realized we need to put another part of the curriculum is helping young people like myself, also as a learner, learn how to engage in the regulatory process itself. I was the only person under the age of 60 in the proceedings, and the same old guys were saying, well, we have to have this material, we couldn't possibly run our horticulture industry without it, and the understanding that we're in an age of global consequence, and that we really, really need our buffering seaweed, we really, really need our wetlands, the fact that we no longer can just freely mine to support these industries, and that we have got to therefore invest in, for instance, farming seaweed in degraded waterways that are over-contaminated with nitrogen, and then using that farm seaweed, cleaning the waterways to use as fertilizer instead. And that there are modest scale environmental engineering approaches that are possible, but are made unviable by the fact that we keep mining from the wild. And anyway, that's just a small point, but I just to say, it's like, it takes a while if you're an activist trying to poke around and figure out the causalities and what the industry says and why it must be impossible, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that we as young organizers are often overemphasizing the role of social media or public education or kind of Comey type campaigns, and that we really have to get in there, frankly, into the government, and eventually many of us need to join the government, because it's too many oldsters only running the show is not going to work.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're coming to the end. Lenny, you have one more point, and then we might wrap it up if that's all right with everyone.
I would just like to respond to Rich's question that he just posted on the chat, because I also think that it's important that a lot of solutions that we talk about, especially with ecology, are of course very local in nature, but you talk about global energy systems, and I see it from this base that we had here in Friesland. They're building the biggest gas import terminal here right around the corner in Wilhelmshaven. And I think I really like the slogan of resistance and creation. Like, a lot of stuff that we are doing here, I think, is about creation and creating alternatives, but there's so strong forces that you see and again that are, for example, building this terminal here around the corner that basically destroy all the small work that we do. So I think it's really important to to combine this creation work with resistance work. Again, there, I think, coming together and being in these living communities, like in these 3 months that we lived here, we could really start a huge campaign against fossil and fracking gas here in Germany. And that was really possible because we were living together with 3-4 activists here in one place. Didn't have to connect just about via Zoom, but we could do brainstormings, connect very quickly to the local people here. And so again, I think that this living, the living conditions that you go into can really facilitate also your resistance work. So resistance and creation is really a slogan that stuck to my head, and I'm trying to live according to that.
Nice. I think that's the last kind of point before we wrap it up. I realized that I'd said that we would, Richard was going to talk in the questions, which he had, and Richard has basically worked in the fossil fuel industry for many years, and we had a phone conversation the other day, and he explained to me that there's a big shift happening in the consciousness within the fossil fuel industry just in the past couple of years. So I thought maybe I'd just mention that, and I don't know if you wanted to say one or two words before we finish, Richard. I don't know if you can. Oh no, I don't think you can come on. Okay, that was it. I think I want to wrap up there. Thank you for all coming, and yeah, that was it. Thank you. Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.